Welcome. It is my very great pleasure to be here today with Kirby Brown and Jennifer O'Neill, recipients of this year's Town and Gown Award from the Campus Sustainability Awards. Kirby is faculty of Native American Literatures in the Department of English and is also affiliated faculty in the Indigenous Race and Ethnic Studies Department. His primary research and teaching areas included Native American and Indigenous writing and cultural production from the late 18th century to the present, Indigenous critical theory, Nation and Nationalism Studies, Sovereignty and Self-Determination Studies, Modernism, Modernity Studies, and Genre Studies. More broadly, he is interested in the politics of race, nation, citizenship, and belonging in ethnic American writing and the relationship between narrative form, cultural representation, public policy, and the law. And Jennifer is faculty in the Department of Indigenous Race and Ethnic Studies and affiliated faculty in history and the Clark Honors College. Her interdisciplinary research and teaching examine the social, political, and historical intersections of Native American, United States, and international relations history in the 20th century to the present, with an emphasis on sovereignty, self-determination, nationhood, cultural heritage, and global Indigenous rights across a variety of fields, mediums, and forms. Her work is dedicated to centering Indigenous traditional knowledge, applying decolonizing methodologies and Indigenous research methods, and implementing place-based education. And both Kirby and Jennifer serve as faculty co-directors of the Native American and Indigenous Studies Academic Residential Community, which is a first-year living learning community for students at the University of Oregon. And they are the joint recipients of this year's Town and Gown Award, as I mentioned earlier, which is sponsored by the Office of Community Relations. This award recognizes individuals or groups for projects that promote, educate, or enhance a more sustainable community. They were selected based on their work on the Western Humanities Alliance Symposium in November 2019, as well as for their partnerships with Oregon's federally recognized tribes. Larissa Ennis of Community Relations said that Kirby and Jennifer won because, quote, these initiatives exemplify community-university collaborations. So welcome, Kirby and Jennifer.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Thank you. My first question, I'll say start with Kirby, but Jennifer, feel free to jump in. Tell me about the Western Humanities Alliance Symposium.
So the Western Humanities Alliance is a consortium of public humanities institutes. Some of them are tied to universities and some of them are municipal, county, kind of state level. But what they do is they come together once a year and a institute will host the conference, and the conference will typically have a theme that is linked to or tied in some way to the place where it's being held. And so you know, in 2019 or in 2017, the Oregon Humanities Center was up to host, and Paul Peppis and the folks over at OHC reached out to me and reached out to the Native Strategies community on campus and said, you know, we think this is a great opportunity to highlight the relationships between the University of Oregon and Indigenous Studies and Indigenous people. Is that something you would want to collaborate on? And so we invited Paul and the folks at OHC to one of our meetings to kind of present their case and to work out, you know, how we might partner together. And we decided it'd be a great opportunity to highlight the work that has been going on at the University of Oregon for a really long time, dating back, if we think about the SWORT project, the Southwest Oregon Repatriation Project, dating back to the, you know, early 2000s, late 90s and early 2000s. And so there's really a ton of things going on campus, and we wanted to highlight the good work that's happening there and to model in a variety of different ways how institutions and academics, students, and universities more broadly can partner with tribal communities in productive ways to center tribal needs, to center, to leverage our own resources as institutions that we have, in service of what tribes, you know, need in terms of resource management, in terms of historical documentation, in terms of our access to archives and resources. And so we basically structured the conference around what that means and what that looks like. And so we centered principles of reciprocity, of respect, of consultation, of kind of a mutual exchange and stewardship of information and partnership. And so those are kind of the values that structured the conference. And then we had a series of, it was a 2-day event that had multiple panels throughout both days, everything from national Native American leaders and figures and academics who are working in questions of sovereignty, on questions of resource allocation and management, environmental sustainability, language revitalization, archival repatriation, just a host of initiatives. And we're just really kind of wanting to use the university in this as an opportunity to foreground that work and to center Indigenous studies and Native peoples in those conversations, and then to model for others opportunities for what that kind of work might look like.
And then my next question is for Jennifer, kind of building on that. Tell me a little bit about working collaboratively across departments, why you think it's important to do so, and any challenges or pitfalls that you've encountered.
Well, I think that we're very lucky that when Paul Pepys came to Native Strategies, that that's already a group that's been well established for numerous years, and we already work really collaboratively together, and it already brings together a lot of interdisciplinary departments already through that group. So I think we're really lucky in the fact that a lot of those partnerships and working across disciplines and academic departments already inherently was occurring through Native Strategies as well through Native Studies. That's also already a very big interdisciplinary group where we bring in courses and classes from all different departments across campus. So we already had a good foundation and good cohort of people that work within Native Studies, that teach courses from within that Department of Ethnic Studies, as well as College of Ed, English, history, also within environmental studies. So we were, and of course, linguistics with the Northwest Indian Language Institute. So we already have historically built an amazing collaborative group of people who work together. So I think it was just easy for all of us to come together for this initiative and to really hear from both Kirby and Paul what they wanted to see occur, and then just to try to make that happen by bringing everybody together. I will say that is what that group really does so well. When we bring an initiative to that group and say this is what we want to do, we kind of then create smaller steering committees, which is what Kirby created and helped us to come together is, you know, who wants to work on this? What experts can we bring in that exist on campus and from the community that can speak to this topic? So I think for us, it was just really organic. I don't think we had any major challenges or pitfalls. It was actually trying to, I think the biggest challenge was trying to see how we could fit so many amazing projects into just 2 days. That was actually our biggest challenge because we had so many amazing things, which is amazing to have you know, a wealth of possibilities to be able to talk about. And that really speaks to what we were trying to get across with this conference is look at all these amazing projects and innovative work that we are doing around Native American Indigenous studies in working with local communities. And that really showed the amount of work that people were putting in both on campus and from Oregon's 9 tribes. So I think that was our challenge, is trying to figure out what projects and initiatives to highlight. And of course, as Kirby mentioned as well, is doing it in the right way with respect, with reciprocity, reconciliation, and figuring out how we could do that. So that was some of the challenges, but good challenges to have.
Yeah, I've never really thought about the too many good ideas as a challenge of strong collaborative work, but it makes sense, right? But it's a good problem to have.
I also think too, just really quickly, it was a real pleasure working with the Oregon Humanities Center.
Yes.
Sometimes I think universities and institutions, you know, they want to do diversity work and they want to do Indigenous work, but then oftentimes a lot of that labor gets put on the very communities that are already overtasked and the very communities that are already, you know, doing so much of that heavy lifting on campus. And OHC was incredible, a partner in the sense that they said, we want you guys to kind of drive the vision, to structure the lineup and the overall structure of the symposium, and we're going to do all the labor. We're going to take all the labor off of you. And I think, like, you know, thinking about partnerships across units on campus. I think that's really a model at the University of Oregon, is the way that the OHC understood that they were coming to a community that was already overtasked with doing this kind of work on campus institutionally and then out in communities. And they understood that, and they were really thoughtful about that. And they basically took all of the logistics and contractual, all of the logistical things and the administrative burden that goes into producing something like this, and they took it completely off of our shoulders. So I just wanted to give them a shout out too, as an incredible institutional partner that helped us pull this off.
Yeah, and that kind of work is worth double its weight in gold. People don't realize how huge it is sometimes.
Yeah, I just want to echo that too, because that is the only way this conference would have happened, is in doing it the right way, where they were willing to take a step back and say that they knew that both us and the community partners were the experts in this area, and that they were willing to just take on the load of kind of coordinating everything and seeing what their role was and was not, as well as, they were doing a lot of type of work maybe that they had never done before with our unique tribal communities that have a very, very specific protocols that we follow as well. And they were willing to, of course, we were guiding them, and okay, we need to make sure and do this and have songs and prayers and very specific things that were meaningful to our tribal community partners that we wanted to make sure and get right. Of course, I'm sure there's always more we could have done, but they really helped us in listening to what those needs were, and then really following through and saying, yes, we'll do that, and tell us what we need to do. And just little things that really mean a lot to tribal community partners, like having elder seating and making sure our elders go first and we eat, things like that. That's really just meaningful. So we help them along the lines with all those different protocols.
That's great. And that's a great segue, Jennifer, because I was curious about your work with Oregon's federally recognized tribes, and so what that work is, and then also sort of philosophically and practically, what role do you think a university can and should play in supporting Native and Indigenous communities?
Yeah, so my work really centers and is focused on place-based education in, or at least in almost all of my classes, as well as centered around how we can center Indigenous research, education, methodologies, ways of knowing. And so my work with Oregon's federally recognized tribes is always centering their history, always centering their culture, traditions, ways of knowing. And I've really been engaged a lot with a variety of different tribes across the state, in addition to my own, which is the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde. I've also been involved with the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs and Burns Paiute Tribe in a multi-year project with both of those tribes to highlight the history of the Northern Paiute. And that was a class taught through the Honors College for over the course of about 6 years. And so it was a long-term project to center their community, their history, that is kind of this hidden history that nobody really knows about within even a hidden history of Oregon's tribes. So it was doing the same thing that we just talked about, even when working with OHC, is as educators, even though I have a background as a Native American person, Native American educator, that it is still my responsibility to know what my role is and what it's not, and meaning that even when we did that project, the tribal elders, community partners were always the ones driving that project, deciding what our research questions were, what the students would be looking at. And then also a huge core value of that is not just engaging with the work remotely from the university, but going to and working with the community in their community and on their land. So we did field research trips every year. So it's really not just talking about how we do the work, but really showing the students how we do the work and sharing and giving back all of the research that we do. So I try to incorporate that in all the classes that I teach. In some way, it looks a little bit different depending on what class I'm teaching, but that is my goal for all the teaching and research that I do, that it's not just to do the research or be engaged, but it's to give back and have a sense of purpose, and really to make sure that we're doing better for our tribal communities. And to your question about what role do I think the university should have and play in supporting Native and Indigenous communities, I think universities have a huge, incredible role in doing this, meaning they should be the ones centering this responsibility, because it shows that government to government relationship between a university and the land that that university is on and historically tied to, which for us is Kalapuya land. The Kalapuya people are the indigenous people of this land who were here first, who were unfortunately displaced from this land and sent to reservations, and are now members of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde and the Confederated Tribes of Siletz. So speaking specifically for the university that we belong to, we have a responsibility to this community in particular, but also to all tribes in Oregon, because this is their land, this is the history that we need to tell, and they have a responsibility to always make sure we are supporting this research, these types of programs, not just these types of programs, but supporting our students that want to come to this university and in ways that help them succeed. So that's why we have spent so much of our time in creating and supporting the academic residential community that we created for our students, because it's the same thing. We want to show them this university is for them, it's supporting them, it's helping them to gain an education, to go back to their communities or wherever they want to go to gain their education. And if they can't see themselves here or be supported, that's an issue. So that's where I see the university has a responsibility in a variety of different areas, but especially for our Native American students that want to come here, especially those that are coming from the tribes here in Oregon, or those tribes that are tied to this land. So it's really important that we remember that.
Yeah. Kirby, do you have anything to add to that as well?
I think just in terms of thinking about Native American Indigenous studies, another way that Native studies as an academic and intellectual discipline, serves tribal communities, I think, is also the educational work that we do for non-Native students that are coming through our programs and coming into our classes. I'm sure Jennifer can speak to this too. I can't tell you how many times term in and term out I've been here for 8 years. This is my 8th year here. And I always have a majority of non-Native students who come through my classes whose only exposure to Native history or to Native people is through popular culture, right? Or through, the very limited interactions that they get through, public history books that they get in their, public school education, which typically, they begin with, the arrival of the Mayflower, and they end in the 19th century with reservations, and then Native people, are erased entirely from the rest of the curriculum, throughout public schools. And that's, I think, a common experience. And so educating all of our students, Indian and non-Indian, about what tribal nationhood is, about the trust and treaty relationship that tribes have with the federal government and where they are in that tribal federal state matrix, about the unique challenges that tribal communities face and the historical roots and context that continue to resonate into the present moment and to produce those challenges, right? So a lot of students, I think, they understand tribal communities as victims of the United States, or as, damaged communities that have been damaged by colonialism. And in one way, that's true, but that these contemporary experiences actually have histories, right? And we can actually learn, like, why, what is it about, for instance, what is it about the place of the University of Oregon on Kalapuya Ilihi historically that has produced, or is partially responsible, the theft of Native lands, essentially, and the forcible removal of indigenous communities from the Willamette Valley, is what makes possible the University of Oregon, right? And so, when Jennifer says rightly that we need to serve our students, it's also about making non-Indian students aware of the historical conditions that allow them to attend the University of Oregon. So, one of the central things for Native American studies is to make sure that every student that comes into and out of all of our classes knows, these kind of foundational principles of nationhood, of sovereignty, of trust relationships, and of ongoing legal, political, and social responsibilities to Native communities. Because we know they're going to be leading nonprofits. We know they're going to be legislators writing laws. We know they're going to be judges on benches who are making rulings. And if they, if Pocahontas is the primary anchor through which they're going to understand, indigenous issues, then, that's a problem. And so Native Studies, I think, works to provide that conceptual and historical grounding for all students that come into and out of our classes, so that, a generation down the line, we might have a judge from one of Brian's or Jennifer's or my classes who's making a ruling and is going to be more informed than they would have been otherwise.
Yeah, and I'm hearing kind of, one layer is a high level, somewhat of a shared experience component of this, the experience since this thing that we call the United States has been in existence. And then the other side is that specificity matters, that it matters who was here, it matters what happened to these people and what they are doing now, that there's those two layers of a high level, somewhat shared experience, and then also the details for individual people, individual tribes.
Yeah, I'm actually teaching Ethnic Studies 399 right now, which is Indigenous Peoples of Oregon. And that's how I frame that exactly with the class, is we start with that higher level experience to introduce, settler colonialism, how this happened, but specifically how that happened to the Indigenous people here in what became the state of Oregon, and specifically then what happened to the Kalapuya people and other tribes across the state. So I think making it very specific to this region, to this land, to this place, to this college, to this university, then that makes it real. So people know, oh, okay, this is what really happened. And that makes it more, so they understand why we're doing this work. Yes, we're teaching this class, but it's more about teaching the class. It's more about bringing awareness. And that's what I tell the students to, by the end of this class, I want you to not only know this information, but I want you to now go tell people. I want you to do better with it and make a difference in the world, so people know about Native American history, particularly here in the state of Oregon.
So my next question is for Kirby to start, but Jennifer, definitely feel free to jump in. Talk to me about how you bring your values of community engagement generally and with engaging with Native American tribes specifically into your work with students.
I think as an instructor in Native American literature, one of the things that I try to do is to, we've talked about specificity. One of the things that I try to do is to give them in all of my classes, whether it's a 200 level introductory survey or a focus study at the 300 level on novels, or an upper division seminar on Native American film and literature, is what I try to do is to provide them as a broad, kind of detailed, tribally specific examples from very particular communities of literature, film, cultural production as I can. One of the things I think that Native Studies does really well is we talk about these larger issues, but we're always grounding them in place. And so, Native American Studies here at the University of Oregon, we like to think of what we do in terms of concentric circles, and that center circle is always Kalapuya Ilihi. And then we kind of go out from there and think about the 9 tribes, and then we go out from there and we think about in the region, what are the tribal communities in the region, and what cultural forms have they produced over the years. And then we can maybe think nationally, hemispherically, and globally, but it always starts and kind of begins and ends locally. And so I try to bring as much of that kind of a model into my syllabi, into the texts and films that I'm teaching, to really emphasize the diversity, like the irreducible diversity of Indian country. And really giving, complicating and nuancing how students understand with whatever expectations they might come into any of my classes with, of what does or doesn't constitute Indianness. By the time they leave, hopefully those expectations have been completely exploded, and now they're actually they might think in tribally specific terms rather than in broader terms about what it is to be Indian, or what constitutes an Indian experience. I think as a cultural studies person and literary studies scholar as well, is I like to bring as many different cultural forms as I can into the classroom, and to make connections between what we would consider to be more traditional cultural forms, for instance, beadwork or weaving or pottery, or winter counts or birch bark scrolls, all of the multiple ways that Indigenous communities express ourselves and have expressed ourselves throughout history, that literature and film and comics and radio and all of these other forms, they're just extensions of what we've always done, right? We've always come across new technologies, taken up those technologies in our community, and then turned them towards our self-representations. And so for me, it's about bringing tribal diversity into the classroom. It's about bringing formal diversity and generic diversity into the classroom. And then it's about challenging students to think about Native people producing contemporary cultural production, not as a break with tradition, but as an extension of it. And so that's mostly what I try to do in my classrooms. When working here locally with students, I think one of the things we do really well and that we try to do, and that kind of grounds everything that we do in our work with students, is we're attentive to where they come from. And we're attentive to the multiple places where they come from, whether they're coming from reservation communities here in Oregon, or they're coming from Portland or other urban centers on the Pacific Coast, or some folks are coming from, plains communities in Nebraska, or in southeastern communities in Oklahoma, to a completely different Indigenous space and a completely different Indigenous history. And so making sure that we're also always attentive to where students are coming from, the particular circumstances that they're arriving with, and some of the challenges they might face, but then also the incredible amount of knowledge and skill and expertise that they bring when they arrive, and trying as much as we can to kind of amplify and provide spaces where they can realize their potential and they can put that experience and expertise to work here on campus. Just a few of the ways that I try to, I think, bring community engagement or engaging Native tribes specifically into some of the work that I do.
Yeah, I'll just add that in addition to all of those amazing things that Kirby does, which I do some of those as well too, just to give a variety of different perspectives and ways of learning, I think something that all of the Native Studies faculty and other faculty that do this type of work, something that we really center when doing community engaged work is working with the community. We bring in community partners to talk in our classes. There are guest speakers, but we also don't just think of them as guest speakers. There are experts from the community coming in. So whether that's a tribal elder or someone leading a project, or whether that's in like traditional ecological knowledges or a storyteller, we want to center that these are the experts. No, they might not be officially university faculty employees. To us, they are our primary sources. They are experts on these topics. And of course, I think for all of the Native Studies faculty, we dream of a time when they would be or will be, and I know one day it will happen, where they are our tribal expertise, that they are the ones to be our experts and officially work for the university in some way and have a specific role. And we've seen this happen throughout the United States, in Canada, with other whether it's like tribal elder in residence or other types of situations. So I think that's really an area that we want to see grow or develop, is create something where they're not just coming in and out, but they're officially part of our programming here. So we try to do that now as much as possible in the way that we can, but we really want to make that official and bring it more as part of our official programming and curriculum. So we center those community partners, and they're the experts, and always centering Indigenous ways of knowing. So that's at the center, not necessarily always Western ways of knowing, not just reading and lecturing, but it's also talking with each other, oral storytelling and oral history and dreaming and visualization. And these are our practices that we are centering, and those are just as important as the Western ways of learning are. And so that's really a way that we try to bring that into our curriculum and into our projects, into everything that we do.
Great. Yeah, that sounds fantastic. So my last question is about engaging with sustainability at a research institution, at a teaching institution, a state institution like the University of Oregon is. And as I'm sure you won't be surprised to hear, a lot of the award winners tend to focus on environmental sustainability, or tend to be awarded for things that fall a little more in the wheelhouse of environmental sustainability. But I like to think of it as sort of that three-legged stool model, where it's environment, equity, and economy or economics. And so I'm wondering if you can just speak briefly about why should the University of Oregon focus on sustainability topics, and feel free to talk about whichever piece resonates most with you and with your work.
Sure, I can go. Well, when I think of this, it's interesting about the three-legged stool of sustainability, because I think the work with tribal communities, particularly here in Oregon, falls into all three of these areas: environment, equity, and economy, although I might think of it in a slightly different way. But I at least think that almost all the work that we do with our tribal communities here in the state is tied to the environment, and not just the environment in the way of bringing awareness about it, but in breathing life into these environments, meaning not just telling of our history and community engagement in that aspect, but bringing awareness about our connection to environment. Why connection to place? So not just environment, but place. Why is our connection to place so important? How does that get centered in these communities, and why is that important? And because then that directly connects back to what the university should be doing, how they could be doing that work, what goals we need to have in doing that. And I think it's really important to just point out the differences and the uniqueness in working with tribal communities around environment and equity and economy, and that hopefully in working in all three of those areas gives back and helps us to better understand and support our tribes in that way, so that it's supporting them however we can.
Yeah, I also think too, I mean, we might think about maybe a four-legged stool. Three-legged stools are kind of kittywampus sometimes, right? They have a tendency to kick over. So if you think about a four-legged stool from an Indigenous studies perspective, it might be like, and building on what Jennifer was saying, we might start thinking about relationality, right? So like, what is so it's environment, it's equity, it's economy, but then it's also our relationship, not just to place as like the site where we live, or the site where the environment or the objects of environmentalism exist, but also as our relatives, right? That like, that we're in you know, for instance, in a lot of communities on the Pacific Northwest, right? Salmon is a huge component of social life, right? It's embedded into oral traditions, it's embedded into ceremonial practices, it's a staple, like sustainable, staple food product and resource. But it's also, a lot of communities understand salmon as relatives, and relatives that come home to provide that kind of sustenance. And so when we think about what it means to be environmental, or when we think about what equity is, or when we think about the economic impacts, how do we rethink these things through Indigenous epistemologies or Indigenous frameworks of relationality? We might think differently about dams and rivers if we actually understood the relatives that swim and live in those spaces as our relatives, right? As family that we have responsibilities to. And so I think conceptually how we think about environmentalism shifts radically when you take an Indigenous studies perspective. And it's not just about human species relationship to other species or places and moral and ethical responsibilities, but also it becomes familial responsibilities, that you're taking care of your family, and that you have, and as we all know, you know, our relationships to our families are more complicated, but they're also more intimate and a bit more immediate. And so I think, you know, taking this three-legged stool and bringing it through Indigenous studies maybe provides a bit even more solid of a foundation to think about how we might think differently and relate differently, not just to our environment, but also to the objects of our study, and how the questions that we ask and how we come into relationship to those objects.
Yeah, and rethinking of those pillars or legs, or however you want to name it, as interdependent, as not one thing that you can pull out from the others.
Yeah, I think the only other thing I would add is that really recognizing and centering that Indigenous people have been at the forefront of sustainability for centuries. And they're the ones that have that knowledge of how to care for their environment the best, and have that unique traditional knowledge to know that. So I think it's so important to just center that traditional knowledge that they know that nobody else knows, in a way that, just like Kirby was talking about the salmon or whatever it might be to that specific community, they're the ones that know that the best. And those perspectives need to be centered and be on the same playing as academics coming in with their knowledge, that traditional knowledge keepers have that as well. And so it's so important for us to really center that.
Yeah. Well, I can't think of a better place to end than that. So I will just say thank you so much to both of you, and congratulations on your award.
Thank you. Thanks so much for recognizing everybody. It's so nice of you to do this. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks.